Before I present my paper, I would first of all like to thank the organizers of this conference. Sorry. Is it better? Okay. The organizers of this conference, first of all, Laura Bazzicalupo and Davide Tarizzo, and others that I don't know, because they have. I would like first of all to thank them for gathering us together around this important issue, namely in what way could psychoanalysis contribute or assist contemporary political theory in its attempt to confront the impasses of our time. Now, my contribution is centered around the relationship between politics and psychoanalysis, and I'll try to show in what way I see, at least, how psychoanalysis could assist contemporary reflection on politics. Now, as is well known, Freud and Lacan refused to propose a political stance to be taken, and that would follow from the discovery of the unconscious. In fact, they avoided any reflections of the political impact that psychoanalysis might have. As a result, psychoanalysts nowadays see in Freud's and Lacan's indifference to politics the proper stance that psychoanalysis should take. But take, of course, a different approach, one precisely that does not accept the absence of politics in psychoanalysis. If psychoanalysis has been the treatment of the individual psyche, its symptoms, and if politics is about constructing a collectivity, then this boundary has always already been crossed in psychoanalysis itself. Following group psychology and the analysis of the ego, where Freud claims that no such boundary exists, we could say that for psychoanalysis itself, there is no such a thing as an individual, or rather, the individual only makes sense as a knot, as a tie of social ties, a network of relations to the others, and first of all, of course, to the big other, this being, of course, a shorthand for the social instance as such. Thus, for psychoanalysis, subjectivity cannot make sense without this inherent relation to the big other, so that sociality and politics have been there from the outset. One can see the two terms of the title, group psychology and the analysis of the ego, as standing in a relation of mutual implication. Group psychology relies on a certain structure of the ego and is made possible by it. And analysis of the ego always already presupposes a group structure. This also explains why the unconscious is neither individual nor collective. If an individual unconscious depends on a social structure, a collective unconscious would demand to define collectivity, a community to which one would belong. Yet no such pre-given community exists. It would be more appropriate, therefore, to say that the unconscious is situated at the intersection between the two, in the very establishment of the ties between an individual to be a subject and a group to which he or she would belong. This is why there is no individual or collective unconscious. Rather, the unconscious intervenes as the link between the two. So my starting assumption is that politics and psychoanalysis encounter the same structural impasse, that of bringing together heterogeneous instances. Indeed, the central issue in analysis is precisely that of a knot or a tie which holds the subject together, an instance that links together three registers that would otherwise remain disconnected, the symbolic of his or her representation, the real of his or her enjoyment, and the imaginary consistency of the body's image. What the patient learns at the end of his or her analysis is that nothing holds together these three instances, the real, the symbolic, and the imaginary, nothing except the symptom or symptom, as Lacan termed it. Politics, likewise, irrespective of the regime or the type of government, confronts the impossible real under the guise of a similar impasse. how to hold together a multitude of irreducible particular subjects which have nothing in common. Modern politics, at least from the French Revolution onwards, has treated this impossibility of the social bond by constructing the community for all. It is a paradoxical community, since the condition for its very constitution requires the exclusion of the exception, of some heterogeneity that is presumed to be resisting the universalization. One could say that what is really at stake between psychoanalysis and politics is the issue of knotting, of tying together. Psychoanalysis and politics thus appear to be two different ways of articulating the disparity of instances. But this is precisely the reason why our question must be formulated as follows. Under what conditions is it legitimate to bring together politics and psychoanalysis? Indeed, from this perspective, any attempt to relate psychoanalysis to politics is far from being obvious. According to the received idea, there seems to be no common ground permitting their encounter. In this view, psychoanalysis is presumed to be defending the rights of the singular, of that precisely which resists the universal. As such, psychoanalysis cannot, without losing its competence, wander into a domain in which something is valid only insofar as it adopts the all. Politics, by contrast, designed as the order of the collective, deals with the masses. Insofar as politics is preoccupied with the question of that which is valid for all, it can only be indifferent to the singular, the proper object of psychoanalysis. For politics, in which there seems to be no place for the singular, it would be an illegitimate step to make the opposite move, from the for all to that of the only for one. The relation between the two can therefore be described as a shift in perspective between 2 points of view, between which no synthesis or mediation seem to be possible. The two may be two sides of the same thing, but they can never meet at the same level. Indeed, there is a non-relation between them, but precisely this ties them together. There is a gap which indicates that psychoanalysis and politics belong together but can never quite meet or converge. I find this solution still unsatisfactory. I would rather propose a step further and reverse the perspective of their mutual exclusion. A step that would allow us to examine under what circumstances the relation between these two domains, that of the for all and that of the irreducible singularity, can be established. Freud again provides us with a way of approaching the tricky nexus of psychoanalysis and politics. This can be seen in Freud's opposition of two kinds of masses. There are, on one hand, what he calls artificial masses, exemplified by the army and the church, which stand for durability and solidity of social ties. On the other hand, there are masses that act rather as hordes and present the untying of the social bond, supplanting them with boundless submission to the primal father. Despite this apparent difference between the two, there is, according to Freud, a secret complicity between them. For Freud, the two structurally belong together insofar as the primitive primary masses is a response to the deadlock or impasses of the artificial one. It presents its underside, its undoing, and is operative in its making, in its functioning, and in its reproduction. It testifies to the precarity of the established ties, their conflictual nature, their contingency. It is their symptom. It displays the same structure as the artificial mass, namely putting the same object in the place of the ego ideal, but in a way that exposes the suppositions of the normal tie. For Freud, both the artificial masses and the primary masses are ambivalent, and it is their ambiguity that points to the side of politics. If the primary masses are the symptom of the artificial ones, they bring to light their hidden conflict, the repression at the price of which the latter can be established. On the other hand, the emergence of primary masses also can can have an effect of lifting the repression, although it presents at the same time the moment of the greatest danger, namely of sinking into the authoritarian regime. It is in that sense that opposition between the structured and permanent ties of the artificial masses and their undoing in the primary masses is the very space of politics. Psychoanalysis thus arrived by a different way to the same point as politics, that of the undoing of the established social ties as inherent to their tying, which is what opens the space for politics. This being precisely a dislocation of the existing social entities, a shift in the ground of what holds the existing relations together. And here I think in this sense that we can also read Jacques Rancière's claim from his La Mésentente, Disagreement. I quote, "Politics is not an affair of ties between individuals and the relations between the individuals and the community. It springs from the count of parts of the community, which is always a false count, a double count, or a miscount." End of quotation. Now, I would like to discuss briefly what politics might result from psychoanalysis if we maintain the interdiction, the prohibition of the passage between the singular and the universal. I propose to call this politics the politics of symptom. It sets out from the assumption that there is something in the subject which makes him or her other, heterogeneous, disparate, unlike any other in a given community, a kernel of the real resisting the dominant social bond. According to this politics of symptom, the task of psychoanalysis is to examine contemporary modes of the social bond in relation to the symptom. The symptom here is conceived as a specific fixing of enjoyment proper to each subject. The symptom is that which in the subject cannot be universalized. The central stake in this politics of symptom is to uncover, to reveal the tension between the social bond and the symptom, more particularly to reveal the incompatibility between the allowed and the forbidden enjoyment. Thus, there is on one hand enjoyment such as it is prescribed by the social other, and on the other hand there is the symptom as a mode of enjoyment particular to each subject, and which is as such insituable within the framework of the standard jouissance. The enjoyment under the guise of the symptom is namely an enjoyment which presents a threat to the social bond. The conclusion to be drawn from the conflict of these two enjoyments is that nothing can hold together subject-symptoms. Nothing can bring together these two irreducible modes of enjoyment. From this perspective, then, enjoyment can be seen as the impossible real of the social bond. Enjoyment, as a symptom, is the irreducible heterogeneity on which no collective logic can be grounded. The final lesson to be drawn from psychoanalysis, insofar as it ventures into the domain of the social and political, is then what I would propose to call the solipsism of enjoyment. In other words, politics and psychoanalysis are in an antinomic relation. There is, however, a problem that this politics of symptom cannot solve. I will argue that capitalism as a hegemonic social bond brings into question what is supposed to be the central issue in this politics, namely the tension between the prescribed standard enjoyment and enjoyment provided by the symptom. Indeed, I would argue that the politics of symptom may well have been applicable in Freud's time. Today, however, there seems to be no place for such a politics of symptom, precisely to the extent that the capitalist discourse itself dissolves the tension between the singular and the universal. Capitalism could be considered to be an aberration among social bonds, since it realizes what in all the other bonds seem to be impossible, namely its compatibility with enjoyment. Capitalism is a social bond which does not demand that the subject sacrifice his or her enjoyment. On the contrary, capitalist social bond is a bond that adapts itself to this trifle, private enjoyments of everybody. So from this perspective, I would argue that not only does enjoyment not endanger the capitalist social bond, but on the contrary, capitalism is a discourse in which the democracy of enjoyment rules. From this perspective, it could be said that capitalism, insofar as it promotes the solipsism of enjoyment, promotes at the same time a particular communal collective figure, that which Jean-Claude Milner termed a paradoxical classis, a community in which its members are joined or held together by that which disjoins them, namely enjoyment. This is precisely the reason why the politics of symptom is still insufficient to draw some crucial implications for a politics of psychoanalysis. Sorry. I forgot to switch off. The second political move made by psychoanalysis concerns the question of the institution that would be the guardian of the discovery of the unconscious and that would secure both its professional standard and its transmission. The question of transmission in psychoanalysis is the part of its internal politics. Indeed, what would be the appropriate organizational form in which this new knowledge could be maintained and properly passed on, its specificity protected, its social promotion secured? This, I think, is where a psychoanalytical association drastically differs from, for example, scientific associations. For what is at stake in science is the guarantee of the repeatable. The experiment is that which is repeatable by anyone, universally available, and this is what ensures objectivity achieved through the process of verification. In psychoanalysis, by contrast, one constantly deals only with the singular, the singularity of symptoms, the singularity of particular unconscious. That is to say, one deals with the non-repeatable. Yet it is precisely from the singular that the universal has to be constructed. The passage from the singularity of psychoanalysis object and the universality of its claims involves a truth that is of a different order than the scientific truth, a truth without a guarantee. And this is where the organization, the psychoanalytical association, is placed into an impossible situation, that of appearing as the guarantee, or rather as the placeholder of the missing guarantee of that truth. At the same time, this peculiar situation places psychoanalysis into the vicinity of politics. For a political act, as well, always intervenes into situations that are inherently singular and draw some universal claims from there, claims with no simple guarantee, so that political organizations like parties, movements, and so on are also called upon as guarantors of that which is ultimately without guarantees. As Althusser argued in his famous paper on Marx and Freud, psychoanalysis is a conflictual science, the feature it shares with Marxism. Both psychoanalysis and Marxism raised the claims to the status of science, but proceeded only by way of conflict and split. They both deal with a truth which is itself antagonistic, a conflictual truth. There is no knowledge which could be free from this antagonism. Every piece of knowledge means taking sides, moving in a battlefield, in an antagonism which is both internal and external, or rather extimate, an externality in the very inside. On this account, the political impact of psychoanalysis emerges precisely with the constant failure to establish even a minimal political consensus within psychoanalysis, of course. But can this be enough for politics? I would argue that we need to make a step further, although in the same direction. My guide here will be Lacan. I will refer more specifically to his television, in which presents both his critique of politics as a way out of capitalism and the task of psychoanalysis in a universe governed by the capitalist discourse. I quote, "The more sane, the more laughter. That's my principle. to wit, the way out of capitalist discourse, which would not constitute progress if it happens only for some." End of quote. First of all, it should be noted that to propose psychoanalysis as a solution, as the way out of capitalism, is only possible in a very specific circumstance, namely of the collapse of the belief in the emancipatory power of politics. It seems that psychoanalysis, according to Lacan, is capable of succeeding there where the politics of emancipation failed, namely to find a way out of the growing impasses of capitalism. Indeed, one is tempted to say that psychoanalysis emerges as a tenant-lieu, placeholder of the impossible, absent emancipatory politics. Lacanian psychoanalysis thus faces a paradoxical task: to find a way out of discourse which is considered to be limitless, eternal, a discourse which precisely knows of no way out. Clearly, the solution proposed by Lacan is a paradoxical solution, since we are dealing here with an interior way out, if I may say so, a paradoxical way out which implies no transgression, no forcing of a barrier, since there is no barrier separating the outside and the inside. In view of this interior way out, it is necessary to take as a point of departure Lacan's thesis about the real of the group. If I take this thesis seriously, this is precisely because Lacan, while insisting on the impossibility of the group by founding his school, École de la Cause, nevertheless succeeded in demonstrating that there is a way of dealing with this impossibility, that is to say, to find a difficult passage between the singular and the universal. Lacan started his theorization of the institution of transmission in psychoanalysis by advancing a paradoxical thesis according to which a group is a real, that is to say, according to his vocabulary, a radical impossibility. This thesis then is to be taken in the sense that there is no group, no form of collectivity which does not proceed by means of identification and exclusion. What then is a proper solution for Lacan? Lacan's solution to the impasse of collectivity consists in opening his school to everybody, which is to say, to anybody. Indeed, he started with the presupposition that there is absolutely nothing to define the analyst, no pre-given predicate or qualification on which his or her identification could be grounded. But if we take this presupposition seriously, then the only solution to secure the transmission of a knowledge that psychoanalysis can produce is to call on all those who are willing to work in the Freudian field. By inviting to his school anybody without any qualification but determined to work within this Freudian field, Lacan created an open, an empty space destined to be inhabited only by a special kind of work, the work of the determined or decided workers, be they analysts or not, as he put it. This is an expression from his founding act. As an expression, the determined, decided worker suggests, in the Lacanian collectivity for all, it is work which decides the belonging. This also implies that this work cannot be standardized. The work to be done is by definition undecidable. This is why it is impossible to distinguish good, decided, determined workers from idlers. It is precisely in this sense that this collectivity is profoundly non-segregationist. It is non-segregationist because the presence of an element allegedly heterogeneous to this collectivity, a non-analyst, is not only tolerated but required in order to bring into question the predicate to be an analyst. This collectivity for all that serves us as a means to render visible the functioning of two logics of the collective, the one that is grounded in the exception and exclusion, and the other that takes as its point of departure the maxim according to which there is none who has not got it, namely the capacity to be a decided, determined worker. The ambition of Lacan's school is that not only to find a way out of the traps of identification, it is above all to find or to force a passage there where there is no passage, an impasse, a deadlock of the group. The paradox of the politics implied in Lacan's school resides in the fact that it is situated precisely at the level of that which is left after the completion of this identification. In short, it is situated at the level of that which cannot be represented nor counted. Yet it is precisely this irreducible singularity that Lacan's school proposes to take into account, or to count one by one, of course. At stake in the foundation of the École de la Cause is a paradoxical project to universalize the singular. We are dealing here with a special collectivity for all, that of workers, a collectivity which implies the disidentification practiced at the level of the group. This is not to say that one discovers oneself as already being such. On the contrary, one only becomes such. This is a subjective transformation that can only be accomplished one by one, and not at once for all of those belonging to such a group. We can see now what is at stake in the distinction of the two logics of the collective, namely, this distinction is eminently political. At issue here is the way in which the logic of the not all is set to work or made operational there where the segregationist logic operates, there where the exclusion reigns. In the end, this paradoxical interior way out proposed by psychoanalysis is nothing other than the constitution of a local, temporary or provisional collectivity for all. And this is precisely the point at which psychoanalysis can meet politics. We can see that the two moves to politics enacted by psychoanalysis itself intersect or converge in a certain point. The point has been variously named as conflictuality, antagonism, rift, a crack in the social order, an excess, the point of ambivalence, the unbounding of social bonds, and so on. One can see it in the conflictual nature of psychoanalytical institution. One can see it in the politics of symptom. One can see it also in what Freud calls the primary mass. And this core, I have been argued, has to be conceived as the site of a politics, inherent in psychoanalysis, as a site precisely. But designating this site is not to establish a politics, taking a political line or making a political act, something that Freud and Lacan have always refrained from doing. It is as if psychoanalysis marks out a site, a locus for politics, without ever quite stepping into this site itself. It is as if it outlines the space for politics without ever quite engaging in politics. It displays the thing that politics is made of without making politics of it. I would go even a step further and say that psychoanalysis and politics share the same ground. They share the same condition, but they treat it in a different way. The common core that binds them together is at the same time the place of their disjunction. One could put this in the following way. There where psychoanalysis refrains from making a step that is missing, from deciding the ambivalence, filling the crack, proposing a new tie for the untied, politics makes a step too much. It decides the ambiguity, it proposes a new tie. It engages a subjective commitment to a process of change, a process without a guarantee. It turns the negative condition into a positive project, a movement, party, a militance, and so on. It proposes a new master signifier, although it may well be aware of its contingency. This, I think, is precisely what hegemony is all about. No doubt, it thereby provisionally, temporarily conceals the crack. It eludes the contingency and the ambiguity of this move. But this is the price of taking this step, which is necessary in politics. On the other side, psychoanalysis is not simply apolitical. Rather, its marking out of the side of politics is something that calls for politics, for an engagement in that side, for a step too far, although one can only do it at the price of entering into another logic than the one that sustains psychoanalysis. The marking out of the side is no neutral description. It requires a step, although it itself doesn't prescribe what this step should be. Analysis is about undoing the knot on which mass is based. It unties the mass at its core, but politics has to re-establish the link between the two, at its own risk, of course, without a prescription and without guarantee. Thank you.